Now, let's talk about this actuarial control cycle, which is one of the most important model or typically a framework that can quite comfortably be used for many actuarial related activities, right? They can be very comfortably be used for areas like asset liability management. I can use them for identifying the alternative investment opportunities, or if at all I want to look out for reinsurance kind of options, I can apply this actuarial control cycle. I can even look at solvency assessment, profitability analysis, right? All these things can get driven by this world of actuarial control cycle. Or capital requirements, capital assessment, and probably I can even look at provisions. Why do I really require provision, and how much should be set aside in the form of provisions? Or I can look out for contributions or typical premium calculations. Even in that particular exercise, I can look out for this actuarial control cycle. And I can even look at the monitoring relating to various mortality related or expense related, lot of other costs and all I can very much monitor, so that I can meet again the solvency requirements and meet the goals of the business. I can look out for investment mismatch between the assets and the liabilities. So probably for any of the major actuarial activities within the organization, I can very well rely on this actuarial control cycle. Of course, just like any other model, it is based on a broad set of assumptions, and depending on the goodness of the assumptions, the overall framework also will go good. So it may not solve all the problems. It may not be a one single panacea for all the one single solution to all the problems. So it may not solve all of them in all circumstances, but of course, this helps in terms of understanding. Following this kind of a framework will help us in terms of understanding the problem more comfortably. So all it typically suggests is three major steps. One, you talk about specify the problem. So we talk about what we do as a part of the specification of the problem. But once you have specified it, you come out with a solution. Develop a solution and go with the monitoring of the experience. These three important steps, which you look out. If I look out for these steps, they look like almost any problem solving mechanism talks the same, right? First it may talk about define the problem properly. This is a definition stage. And probably design and implement the solution coming out here, and effectiveness of that particular solution, monitor it, and probably revise it wherever necessary. This is again the same thing which even the actuarial control cycle is talking about. So from the monitor specifying the problem, you develop a solution. Develop a solution can lead to monitoring of the experience. Again, a monitoring of the experience can lead to specifying a problem. And in some cases, while developing the solution, you can come back and revise the problem. And it can happen the same way while developing the solution or while monitoring the experience, you can again come back to an improvisation to the development of the solution. So this is what typically comes out as a part of the actuarial control cycle. So overall, if I am looking at the process, okay, you analyze the various situations, various products, right? I can look out different situations, different products, different projects. Finally, identify whatever are the various risks that my project is going to expose to. And once I have identified the risk, look out for the financial consequences of the risk. Right? It could be talking about the probability of occurrence of that particular risk, or probably the impact in case that particular risk is going to occur. So come out with some kind of a quantitative mechanisms to measure the risk, and probably even in terms of mitigating the risk or monitoring or probably managing the risk, mitigating the risk, and even transfer if required. Come out with some kind of a quantitative approach where you can reduce the impact of the risk. And whatever the risk management solution that you have developed, get into a monitoring of the various procedures that have been developed in this phase. Now, based on that experience, modify the process, change the approach, and again redo it. So this looks like a very continuous kind of a process. It is more and more cyclical in nature, and it is used almost for any kind of a risk management activity, not just restricted to actuarial liability based risk. Even if I want to look out for market risk, credit risk, investment risk, operations risk, for any kind of a risk, this particular framework can quite comfortably be used. But along with these three stages, where we talk about the specification of the problem, and looking at development of a solution, and monitoring the experience, along with these three, all these three steps should always be specific to the economic and the commercial environment available in that particular country or for that particular project. Right? They have to be looked at in the context of the economic and the commercial environment. And at the same time, when I mean that, it is primarily looking at the various legislation, legal aspects, the taxation related aspects, the accounting related aspects, and probably even the economy related trends. If the economy is in a recession versus a growth kind of a pace. And across all these stages, obviously professionalism is also a must. So this is what typically brings out the actuarial control cycle. Now the word, when I'm using the word actuarial control cycle, the word is a bit misleading. Why should I call it as a control cycle? And why should I call it actuarial? First of all, if you remember the diagram which I have brought in, specify the problem, develop a solution, monitor the experience. I've actually put two-way arrows. What it means is the feedback loop is very much important in the entire process. Right? There is a continuous evaluation and feeding back the result back into the specification so that the model gets continuously monitored and updated. Right? And so monitoring is an important aspect, feedback is an important aspect, and all these three stages are very strongly interrelated. One major part. And we need to understand that here it's not an engineering system, right? It's not a typical engineering system wherein whatever the output I get, automatically from one stage it is fed into the other stage. This is not something like that. The outcome is not predetermined. outcome is completely unknown kind. There is a lot of uncertainty associated with the outcome. So the feedback involves some kind of personal judgment. Feedback is not a kind of a mechanical stuff which is directly fed back from one stage to the other. So a professionalism is very much required in terms of taking the output of one into the other, which means I can't directly call it as a cycle. I have to call it as a control cycle, because the control is basically the manual involvement that is involved, that is there at every stage of this cycle. Now, why should I call it as actuarial? Because this looks like a general problem solving kind of a stuff itself. Now, this is where we are talking about a few actuarial related tasks as a part of more specific stuff. We are looking at actuarial related stuff. One is we are using it to solve the uncertain future events, the tasks and the problems that are relating to the uncertain future event. We are primarily looking at the financial impact of them. We can use this kind of a model, or we can typically look out for a long-term perspective as a part of the model, right? And probably we can still make the decisions in the short term, right? Though the overall focus is long term, I can still make the decisions in the short term based on the future outcomes that are going to come out. Probably a short term liquidity crisis, I can very well address them through this model. And different kinds of stakeholders I can involve and try to understand their requirements as well as the risk profiles of each of the stakeholders and incorporate them into the solution. So all these are more actuarial in nature, right? I'm using the models, any kind of models that I'm building for future financial outcomes. I'm trying to use them for predicting the future financial outcomes. I'm using the assumptions based on the historical data and experiences. I'm bringing out the assumptions based on that. All these are making this particular framework more and more actuarial. I'm even incorporating the specific economic and commercial environment, like legislation related, regulation related, taxation related, competition related, all the things that I'm incorporating as a part of the model. And whatever the interpretation that the model is giving, I'm trying to use to come out with some kind of practical strategies using the output and the interpretation that is coming out of the model. And I'm doing a monitoring of the model and the results of the model, and whatever is the experience that is coming out, I'm constantly monitoring it and updating it. So I'm doing a lot of modification to the model based on whatever the outcomes that are coming out. So all these are typically applied in light of various actuarial activities, risk management activities. That is where the same control cycle, I'm calling it as an actuarial control cycle, right? Now, if I have to go a bit more detail into each stage of the actuarial control cycle, where let's say I'm talking about the problem specification kind of a stage, right? So basically now comes the different stakeholders. So there could be government, there could be policy holders, there could be investors, there could be wide varieties of people, there could be beneficiaries, there could be various people who are employees, there are various people who are involved, who are the stakeholders. Try identifying the risks of different kinds of stakeholders in detail, and you specify the problem from the perspective of each of the stakeholders. So that requires a good amount of time and effort to be dedicated, and this should help me giving a broader picture in terms of strategic courses of action that needs to be taken to address each of these particular risks. So we are not implementing it, we are just trying to identify. So the different risks that are managed by different kinds of shareholders and stakeholders, and what are the different ways that are available to mitigate them, to manage them, or to transfer them. So again, when I am doing any one of them, what is the cost and benefit that is involved with each of these activity? And this can be done with respect to both their core business as well as the non-core businesses as well. Insurance underwriting is a part of their core business, but probably taking care of IT solutions may not be their core business. It could be a non-core business which will help them in doing their core business more effectively. So we get an option to get different kinds of, there is different kinds of options and alternatives that are available, right? Including if I want to do a transfer, what are the different kinds of transferring mechanisms that are there, right? How much would each of them is going to cost? So there is a detailed understanding of each of the stages, which in the specification of the problem stage, all these things should be captured and should be analyzed upon. Right, this can help in determining the premiums, the contributions, all that stuff. Then comes, once I have an awareness of all those things, that is where I'm having moving on to the next stage, where I'm getting into the development of the solution. So whatever are the already available models that are there, do some kind of critical examination of all the available models, and how can some kind of minimum adjustments be made to suit to this particular problem, and out of them choose the most appropriate model. If at all with a minor amount of modifications or adjustments you can use it, choose the appropriate model, and in case nothing is involved, probably get into the construction of such a particular model. And now comes a great understanding. Now that if you say I'm going ahead development of the model, have a good hold on the assumptions that are used in the model, because the assumptions are very critical. They are the ones that drive the results. So a very good understanding of the sensitivity of each of those assumptions is very much essential. And how do you interpret the results? Right? What are the different kinds of results that are coming? How do you interpret them? And how are these results impacting our overall problem? Whatever you have defined, are these results coming closer to explain what the problem is? Are there proper solutions to the problem that we have defined? So we are typically focusing more on that. And how are these going to impact the different stakeholders? Is it benefiting some of them versus is it pushing some of them into a risk? Right? So based on that, come out with a proposed solution. And if possible, there are various alternative solutions that are available. Try capturing all those different solutions along with the impact on the overall problem as well as on the different stakeholders. And out of them, you finalize one of them and come out with a formal proposal about the implementation of a particular solution. So this is what gets done as a part of the developing the solution phase. And one thing we have to understand is this solution that we have developed is not a one-time kind of an activity. It has to be more and more dynamic. Whatever the model that we have developed, it has to be more and more dynamic. It has to reflect the current experience levels altogether. So which means there is a constant monitoring and feedback kind of a phase, That is very much essential as a part of this cycle, right? Whatever the outcomes that are coming, it has to be fed back into the problem specification and solution development, because there is a regular updating of the model that has to happen to reflect the current scenarios. And probably this phase also should help me in terms of identifying all the departures, right? Wherever there is a deviation from the target heavily, identify a causal analysis, perform a causal analysis in terms of what has really caused the deviation, and is it possible that such kind of deviation can recur again in future? Have I taken sufficient steps to make sure that such kind of problem is not going to repeat? So that's one more thing that that has to be taken care of. And whether, I mean, here a few things that have to be really answered is my model solving the problem as per the requirement or as per the specification phase, or is it fully completely specified, right? Does it have any kind of limitations, right? In some cases, is it going to work, and in some scenarios it's not going to work? Have you identified any such kind of limitations? Did it take all the factors into account, or did it omit any of those important factors that you thought should go as a part of the building of the model? So all these things should be taken care of, refined, and it has to come up to date. Remember, even the big companies like Microsoft as such, they can't build a product in one single attempt. We have been seeing that the product keeps getting revised again and again, sometimes with the additional new features that are coming in, and in some cases it's purely the bug fixing that they have to do, which means there is a possibility that the model can result in some kind of errors. But having an understanding of what are the limitations of the current model, am I fine with releasing this with these kind of limitations? So having a good understanding and then trying to constantly improve the model is something that is very much expected. And if you are failing at that stage, probably after a certain point, the model would create unsatisfactory consequences to your stakeholders, and that is what would impact the effectiveness of the model completely. So understanding of this actuarial control cycle, the stages of this actuarial control cycle, and what happens at each of the stage of this cycle, how it really helps in terms of building effective models is what is the context of this particular session. All right.